the 1980s, a more carefree generation that we have a lot of fond nostalgia for. It's prominently known for such film classics as Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, The Goonies, Blade Runner, and Karate Kid. And to TV series such as Family Ties, Cheers, the very impolitically correct Married with Children, Miami Vice, and to the all-time classic in Knight Rider. And there are some that are lesser known pictures, such as the subject of today's review, 1987's The Secret of My Success. Has this held up over time, or has it aged poorly? Well, only one way to find out as we head back to the 1980s once more. You know, I think what I like about this movie is the pacing. The story moves at a fluid enough rate where you're not given too much information too quickly, and at the same time it doesn't slow to a crawl that you're marking time for it to pick up the pace. I like to think of this as a Cinderella rags to riches story where our protagonist, Brantley Foster, played by the talented Michael J. Fox, starts off as a mailroom clerk wanting to ascend up the ladder as a financer of the company ran by his distant uncle, Howard Prescott. There's a similar sense of duality in the essence of Clark Kent to Superman and Bruce Wayne to Batman. Foster is leading a double life, one as the mailroom clerk who has ambitions of taking the company forward, and the other as his pseudonym, Carlton Whitfield, posing as a new executive. The only thing that remains the same is the charisma and aggressive business approach that he has to take the company forward when he sees the flaws in how the company is being run and knows it can be run more efficiently with some tweaks and expanding rather than making budget cuts. While the story is charming enough, there are some elements that would be deemed as inappropriate today. Such as Foster getting changed in his office and in the elevator in front of his secretary, which is the kind of thing that would lead to disciplinary acts in the workplace, and this segment when he's being interviewed for the umpteenth time would be looked at in a very dim light today.
I want this job. I need it. I can do it. Everywhere I've been today, there's always been something wrong. Too young, too old, too short, too tall. Whatever the exception is, I can fix it. I can be older. I can be taller. I can be anything.
Can you be a minority woman?
Okay, folks, I'm no expert here, but that wouldn't fly today. Other elements that would be seen as too risque is when Foster discovers the woman he was sleeping with in the beginning turns out to be married to his uncle, in effect making Vera his auntie. Okay, folks, how many times do we have to say this?
Repeat after me, people. Incest is not wincest. It's gross.
You heard the lady. Now granted, she's not his aunt biologically, but the implications do still tread on very thin ground. Sure, it's played for laughs, but at the same time, I think given the passage of time since this release, if it were being written today, it would more than likely be cut. Other implications added for Foster is his love interest, Christy, played by Helen Slater, who was mostly known for playing the titular character in 1984's Supergirl, who also happens to be part of an extramarital affair with her boss, Howard Prescott. So, we basically have a wannabe player that's trying to be Charlie Harper, but with none of the charm nor charisma. One of the more amusing segments is the midnight scene at the country house, where multiple members of the party are going from room to room set to the score of Yellow's Oh Yeah. Also, the symbolism that is used when that song is first played makes me question how this movie got away with being a PG back in the day, because you don't even need to read between the lines of the sexual innuendos that are on display. And for a PG movie, there are at least 2 to 3 love scenes in the movie that, again, made me question why this wasn't a PG-13. Because what parent would take their kids to see this when most kids then and now would be able to read through the subtext of what's going on? Okay, folks, there's a strong chance I might be reading too much into this, but I don't know if I would have included those scenes. The grand payoff of the story is when you see Brantley, Christy, Vera, Fred Melrose, and Foster's secretary Sheila acquiring enough assets to stage a takeover of Penrose, with Vera assuming the role as chairperson and firing her soon-to-be divorced husband, Howard, as she was the daughter of the founder of the company. I would say the story itself is charming enough and you get to care about the characters, but as I said earlier, there are some aspects that have really not aged well. It's a product of its time and should be treated as such. Not everyone has the foresight to look 3.5 decades into the future and see how society would change. But if you're able to look past that, you'll find a charming Cinderella-esque story where you get to see the protagonist get the reward and the a-hole of the movie get his more than just desserts. And that, in of itself, is satisfying. At this point in the late 80s, Michael had been catapulted into the stratosphere through his breakout role as Marty McFly in 1985's Back to the Future. There's still a lot of that Marty charm in his performance as Brantley Foster, with the way he just has his cut to the chase, take no prisoners, tell it like it is attitude. I think audiences can appreciate a character like this because they know where they stand with someone who's just direct, and Michael does this excellently as Foster and his alias, Carlton Whitfield. Some of the more amusing scenes are the awkward segments he has with Margaret as his sexually aggressive Aunt Vera. As I mentioned earlier, it is played for laughs, but you can't help but feel bad for Foster when he's in, essentially, a rock and hard place scenario. The story is mostly told from his perspective as a farm boy from Kansas that wants to make it big as an executive in New York. I think what sells his performance to the audience is how he's juggling his double life as Foster and Whitfield, while trying not to get discovered by his mailroom boss and his creepy uncle. When we first see Christy, she's very cold and distant towards Brantley. It's not too far removed from how executives were then, as Helen would actually observe female executives in how they would behave in a very military style in being proficient and focusing on the task at hand. As she gets to know and understand Foster's plans more, like a flower she begins to open up and let her guard down. Helen has amazing chemistry with Michael with how they play off each other and how she makes it look like her character is gushing for Brantley. And I couldn't help but see a resemblance between her and the late Princess Diana of Wales, as the facial features and hair is unmistakable. Margaret gives a convincing performance as a sexually frustrated wife of the company president, as she just seems to have sex on the brain, from when she's being driven to her country home and to when she corners Brantley in her husband's office. That's the kind of thing that would lead to lawsuits and therapy. I wonder if there were times Michael thought, is she acting here? Because with a good actor, you can't tell if they're just doing the scene or enjoying it too much. You decide. The late Jordan does a good job of making you hate his character. He's bossy, smarmy, slimy, condescending, and creepy. The way he even talks down to his nephew is the sort of behaviour that is frowned upon, not just from a business standpoint, but also morally. But given how comfortable the character was at being immoral at this stage, it's more than likely he had been a creep for a while. Well, if he's getting jeered, you could make the argument that he's doing his job right. Like most movies I've reviewed over the years, the score acts as a character in acting applicably for what the scenes are looking to do. Whether it's the fantasy moment where Foster is gushing for Christy, or to the grand payoff at the end where Foster reaches for what he had been seeking. Success as an executive. It's very light rock and roll, which was commonplace from the likes of Huey Lewis and the News to the type of material that Bruce Springsteen would put out with Dancing in the Dark, which in that music video featured the first ever appearance of Courtney Cox, which also gave birth to the Carlton Dance years later on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. You can tell it's very much an 80s movie with the keyboard score that plays in the background, and it's the same type that would play in 1990s Home Alone. And what 80s flick would be complete without that quintessential sax? Gonna be honest, I kinda miss that use of saxophone performances in movies where it's able to give a score personality. Plus, it's sassy and classy. This is also back when recording artists would have their songs played in the movie before studios would have their own original scores featured more prominently. I can only presume that's due to the rate of inflation over time that would have likely made music labels charge studios more for the use of their artists' material. Whereas in the 80s, movie studios would reach out to recording artists to have them produce tracks that would not only help promote their film, but it also helped the artists out as well, as their tracks would get featured in the soundtrack and the movie. Although Yellow's Oh Yeah is used in the movie, it does not feature on the soundtrack, nor does Katrina and the Waves' Walking on Sunshine, both of which are great songs. I would say that the score and the soundtrack used in this picture is one of the more reprising features, as it has such an infectious, upbeat, and energetic feel that you want to be in the world that this movie inhabits, because it makes you feel that you could make anything you want happen. That's a beautiful and powerful thing. The movie grossed a profit of $110 million against a budget of $10 to $12 million. If you adjust that for 2020, and it would be $255 million today. It garnered mixed reviews from the likes of Roger Ebert that rated the movie 3 out of 5 stars, citing that Michael J. Fox was a desperate center that must have struggled with the shift of moods from comedy, slapstick, sex farce, and to boardroom brawls. Whereas Vincent Canby of the New York Times felt that the movie was close to being inspired with the way Brantley was leading Double Lives. It debuted #1 at the box office, taking in $7.8 million on its opening weekend, April 10, 1987. It stayed at #1 for 5 weeks and would go on to outgross RoboCop, Lethal Weapon, and Dirty Dancing. It even made an additional $29 million through video rentals. The movie has been enjoyed on VHS, DVD, and Blu-ray since 1987. I'm MJ Knight, and we went back to the boardroom for the secret of my success.